Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing our series on Ralph Waldo Emerson's journals. We are in Volume 3 and in journal collection number 25. Emerson is 30 years old at this point, and the previous winter he had just returned from a long trip overseas in Europe. The year is 1834 and we are up to April 27th. And with that said, I will go ahead and start. Here is a Middleus margaritiferus, as large as a moon and of the same color, and a Talina radiata, which reminds the beholder of the rising sun. I think they should call one of those shells Moon and the other Morn. Today I found also the Andromeda calculata, Houstonia, Potentilla sarmentosa. This impetrum and smilax and kalmia and privet, I have wondered oft to what end they grew. How ridiculous! Ask wrens and crows and bluebirds. As soon as you have done wondering and have left the plant, the bird and the insect return to it as their daily table, and so it renews its race for 1,000 summers. Natural history gives body to our knowledge. No man can spare a fact he knows. The knowledge of nature is most permanent. Clouds and grass are older antiquities than pyramids or Athens. Then they are most perfect. Goethe's plant a genuine creation. Then they bear strange but well-established affinities to us. Nobody can look on a cistus or a Brentus without sighing at his ignorance. It is unknown in America. Linnaeus is already read as the Plato who described Atlantis. A classification is nothing but a cabinet. The whole remains to be done thereafter. A religion of forms is not for me. I honor the Methodists who find, like St. John, all Christianity in one word, love. To the parishes in my neighborhood, Milton would seem a free thinker when he says, quote, "They, the Jews, thought it too much license to follow the charming pipe of him who founded and proclaimed liberty and relief to all distresses." End quote. April 28th. Vaccinium tenellum, Pyrus ovalis, Anemone nemorosa, Fregraria virginiana. The day is as good for these as oaks and corn. The air vibrates with equal facility to the thunder and to the squeak of a mouse, invites man with a provoking indifference to total indolence and to immortal actions. You may even shun the occasions of excitement by withdrawing from a profession and from society, and then the vast eternity of capacity, of freedom, opens before you, but without a single impulse. A day is a rich abyss of means, yet mute and void. It demands something godlike in him who has cast off the common yokes and motives of humanity, and has ventured to trust himself for a taskmaster. High be his heart, faithful his will, vast his contemplations, that he may truly be a world, society, law to himself, that a simple purpose may be to him as strong as iron necessity is to others. It is a faithful saying worthy of all acceptation, that a reasoning man, conscious of his powers and duties, annihilates all distinction of circumstances. What is Rome? What is royalty? What is wealth? His place is the true place, and superior therefore in dignity to all other places. Linnaeus at Copenhagen, Oberlin on the high Alps, White at Selborne, Roger Bacon at Oxford, Rammohun Roy in India, and Heber at Bombay, Washington in the Jerseys. These are the Romes, the empires, the wealth of these men. The place which I have not sought, but in which my duty places me, is a sort of royal palace. If I am faithful in it, I move in it with a pleasing awe at the immensity of the chain of which I hold the last link in my hand, and am led by it. I perceive my commission to be coeval with the antiquity of the eldest causes. Literature is the conversion of action into thought for the delight of the intellect. It is the turning into thought what has done without thought. It aims at ideal truth, but it is only approximation. The word can never cover the thing. You don't expect to describe a sunrise. Art actualizes thought. Literature idealizes action. Mission of the intellect. The vulgar man seems to himself unmoored the moment he has changed his scene and associates. He misses his chair and his hat peg. The wise man carries his spring and his regulator within, and is at home in untrodden wilds. April 29th. Fontenelle said, if men should see the principle of nature laid bare, they would cry, "What is this all? How simple they are! How is the wonder perpetually lessened by showing the disproportionate effect upon the eye of simple combination? The shell is a marvel until we see that it was not one effort, but each knot and spine has been in turn the lip of the structure. Shakespeare, how inconceivable, until we have heard what Italian novels and Plutarch's lives and old English dramas he had, also what contemporary fund of poetic diction. A Webster's speech is a marvel until we have learned that a part of it he has carried in his head for years, and a part of it was collected for him by young lawyers, and that Mr. Appleton furnished the facts, and a letter from Mr. Swain turned the paragraph. St. Peter's did not leap full grown out of the head of the architect. The part that was builded instructed the eye of the next generation how to build the rest. Mirabeau has his Dumont. The tree did not come from the acorn, but is an annual deposit of vegetation in a form determined by the existing disposition of the parts. Every leaf contains the eyes which are sufficient to originate a forest. The magnet is a marvel when we simply see it spontaneously wheel to the north and cling to iron like one alive. The wonder diminishes when it is shown to be only one instance of a general law that affects all bodies and all phenomena, light, heat, electricity, animal life. A ship, a locomotive, a cotton factory is a wonder until we see how these Romes were not built in a day, but part suggested part, and complexity became simplicity. The poem, the oration, the book are superhuman, but the wonder is out when you see the manuscript. Homer, how wonderful, until the German erudition discovered a Silas of Homeric poems. It is all one, a trick of cards, a juggler's sleight, an astronomical result, an algebraic formula, amazing when we see only the result, cheap when we are shown the means. This it is to conceive of acts and works, to throw myself into the object so that its history shall naturally evolve itself before me. Well, so does the universe, time, history evolve itself, so simply, so unmiraculously from the all-perceiving mind. G.P.B. tells a ridiculous story about the boy learning his alphabet. That letter is A, says the teacher. A, drawls the boy. That is B, says the teacher. B, drawls the boy, and so on. That letter is W, says the teacher. The devil? Is that W? Inquires the pupil. Now I say that this story has an alarming sound. It is the essence of radicalism. It is Jack Cade himself. Or is it not exquisite ridicule upon our learned Linnaean classifications? What shell is this? It is a strombus. The devil? Is that a strombus? Would be the appropriate reply. The fly strikes against the window pane until at last he learns that, though invisible, there is an obstacle there. The soul of man, by 1,000 offenses, learns at last that there is an invisible law which, and then there's a blank. April 30th. There are more purposes in education than to keep the man at work. Self-questioning is one, a very important end. The disturbance, the self-discord which young men feel is a most important crisis, indispensable to a free, improvable race creature. Give me the eye to see a navy in an acorn. If I could write like the wonderful bard whose sonnets I read this afternoon, I would leave all and sing songs to the human race. Poetry with him is no verbal affair. The thought is poetical, and nature is put under contribution to give analogies and semblances that she has never yielded before. Whether the same or an equal tone of natural verse is now possible. Whether we are not 2 ages too late. But how remarkable every way are Shakespeare's sonnets! Those addressed to a beautiful young man seem to show singular friendship, amounting almost to a passion, which probably excited his youthful imagination. They are invaluable for the hints they contain respecting his unknown self. He knew his powers, he loved Spenser, he deplored his own way of living, etc., etc. What said CCE the other day touching a common impression left by Jesus of Nazareth and this poet? The war of the telescope and the microscope, the mass and the particular. Science ever subdivides. It separates one star into two, a nebula into a constellation, a class into genera, a genus into species, and ever the most interesting facts arise from ascertaining habits of an individual. We should find the individual traits of a robin or a bee probably far more interesting than their generic habits when once we arrive to know them, as much as the traits of one dog affects us more than, though interesting, the canine character. Newton and Webster charm us more than accounts of the character of the Saxon race. It occurred also in the forest that there is no need to fear that the immense accumulation of scientific facts should ever encumber us, since as fast as they multiply, they resolve themselves into a formula which carries the world in a filial. Every commonplace we utter is a formula in which is packed up an uncounted list of particular observations, and every man's mind at this moment is a formula condensing the result of all his conclusions. May 1st. In this still Newton we have 7 Sabbaths in a week. The day is as calm as eternity, quite a Chaldean time. The philosophy of the wave. The wave moves onward, but the water of which it is composed does not. The same particle does not rise from the valley to the ridge. Its unity is only phenomenal. So it is with men. There is a revolution in this country now, is there? Well, I am glad of it. But it don't convert nor punish the Jackson men, nor reward the others. The Jackson men have made their fortunes, grow old, die. It is the newcomers who form this undulation. The party we wish to convince, condemn, loses its identity. Elect Webster president, and find the Jackson party if you can. All gone, dead, scattered, Webstermen, Southerners, Masons, any and everything. Judicial or even moral sentence seems no longer capable of being inflicted. France, we say, suffered and learned, but the Red Revolutionists did not. France today is a newborn race that had no more to do with that regicide France than the Sandwich Islanders. May 3rd. The idea according to which this universe is made is wholly wanting to us, is it not? Yet it may or will be found to be constructed on as harmonious and perfect a thought, self-explaining as a problem in geometry. The classification of all natural science is arbitrary, I believe, no method philosophical in any one. And yet in all the permutations and combinations supposable, might not a cabinet of shells or a flora be thrown into one which should flash on us the very thought? We take them out of composition, and so lose their greatest beauty. The moon is an unsatisfactory sight if the eye be exclusively directed to it, and a shell retains but a small part of its beauty when examined separately. All our classifications are introductory and very convenient, but must be looked on as temporary, and the eye always watching for the glimmering of that pure plastic idea. If Swammerdam forgets that he is a man, and when you make any speculative suggestion as to the habits or origin or relation of insects, rebukes you, with civil submission that you may think what you please, he is only concerned for the facts. He loses all that for which his science is of any worth. He is a mere insect hunter, and no whit more respectable than the nuthatch or titmouse, who are peeping and darting about after the same prey. This is what Goethe sought in his Metamorphosis of Plants. The Pythagorean doctrine of transmigration is an idea. The Swedenborgian of affections clothed is one also. Let the mind of the student be in a natural, healthful, and progressive state. Let him, in the midst of his most minute dissection, not lose sight of the place and relations of the subject. shun giving it a disproportionate importance, but speedily adjust himself and study to see the thing, though with added acquaintance of its intimate structure, under the sun and in the landscape as he did before. Let it be a point as before. Integrate the particulars. We have no theory of animated nature. When we have, it will be itself the true classification. Perhaps a study of the cattle on the mountainside as they graze is more suggestive of truth than the inspection of their parts in the dissection room. The way they classify is by counting stamens or filaments or teeth and hoofs and shells. A true argument, what we call the unfolding an idea, is as is continually done in Plato's dialogues and Carlyle's characteristics, or in 1,000 acknowledged applications of familiar ethical truths. These are natural classifications containing their own reason in themselves, and making known facts continually. They are themselves the formula, the largest generalization of the facts, and if thousands on thousands more should be discovered, this idea hath predicted already their place and fate. When shall such a classification be obtained in botany? This is evidently what Goethe aimed to do in seeking the arch plant, which being known would give not only actual but all possible vegetable forms. Thus to study would be to hold the bottle under water instead of filling it drop by drop. Monday, May 3rd. The parliamentary people say we must not blink the question. There is an intellectual duty as imperative and as burdensome as that moral one. I come such as to the present subject of classification. At the center it is a black spot, no line, no handle, no character. I am tempted to stray to the accessible lanes on the left hand and right, which lead round it, all outside of it. Intellectual courage, intellectual duty says we must not blink the question, we must march up to it and sit down before it and watch there, incessantly getting as close as we can to the black wall, and watch until slowly lines and handles and characters shall appear on its surface, and we shall learn to open the gate and enter the fortress, unroof it and lay bare its ground plan to the day. Mr. Coleridge has written well on this matter of theory in his Friend. A lecture may be given upon insects or plants that, when it is closed, irresistibly suggests the question, well, what of it? An enumeration of facts without method. A true method has no more need of firstly, secondly, etc., than a perfect sentence has a punctuation. It tells its own story, makes its own feet, creates its own form. It is its own apology. The best argument of the lawyer is a skillful telling of the story. The true classification will not present itself to us in a catalogue of 100 classes, but as an idea of which the flying wasp and the grazing ox are developments. Natural history is to be studied not with any pretension that its theory is attained, that its classification is permanent, but merely as full of tendency. May 6th. Well, my friend, are you not convinced that you should study plants and animals? To be sure, the reasons are not very mighty, but words. To it again. Say then that I will study natural history to provide me a resource when business, friends, and my country fail me, that I may never lose my temper, nor be without soothing, uplifting occupation. It will yet cheer me in solitude, or I think in madness that the mellow voice of the robin is not a stranger to me, that the flowers are reflections to me of earlier, happier, and yet thoughtful hours. Or again, say that I am ever haunted by the conviction that I have an interest in all that goes on around me, that I would overhear the powers, what they say. No knowledge can be spared, or any advantage we can give ourselves, and this is the knowledge of the laws by which I live. But finally, say frankly that all the reasons seem to me to fall far short of my faith upon the subject. Therefore boldly press the cause as its own evidence. Say that you love nature, and would know her mysteries, and that you believe in your power by patient contemplation and docile experiment to learn them. May 8th. The men of this world say ever of the thinker, how knoweth this man these things, having never learned? Ho, every one that thirsteth, Come ye to the waters, and he that hath no money come buy wine and milk without money. The recluse hermit oftentimes more doth see, etc., a few wise instincts, etc. Wordsworth. May 16th. I remember when I was a boy going upon the beach and being charmed with the colors and forms of the shells. I picked up many and put them in my pocket. When I got home I could find nothing that I had gathered, nothing but some dry, ugly mussels and snail shells. Thence I learned that composition was more important than the beauty of individual forms to effect. On the shore they lay wet and social by the sea and under the sky. The sun illuminates the eye of the man, but the eye and the heart of the child. His heart is in the right place. Many eyes go through the meadow, but few see the flowers in it. May 21st. I will thank God of myself, and for that I have. I will not manufacture remorse of the pattern of others, nor feign their joys. I am born tranquil, not a stern economist of time, but never a keen sufferer. I will not affect to suffer. Be my life then a long gratitude, I will trust my instincts, for always a reason halts after an instinct, and when I have deviated from the instinct, comes somebody with a profound theory, teaching that I ought to have followed it. Some Goethe, Swedenborg, or Carlyle. I stick at scolding the boy, yet comfortably to rule I scold him. By and by the reprimand is a proven error. Our first and third thought coincide. I was the true philosopher in college, and Mr. Farrar and Mr. Hedge and Dr. Ware the false, yet what seemed then to me less probable. There are three things, said my worthy friend W. to me, that make the gentleman: the hat, the collar, and the boots. Ah, that the Professor Teufelsdrockh had heard the word. May 29th. Dr. Darwin's work has lost all its consequence in the literary world. Why? Not from Curie, nor from Brown. No, a dim venerable public decides upon every work. When it offers itself, a sort of perplexity, and uneasy waiting for judgment appears in the living literary judges. But the work presently takes its true place, by no effort, friendly or hostile, but by the real importance of its principles to the constant mind of man. And this in a way that no individual can much affect by blame or praise. It is the specific gravity of the atom. An aspiring young man readily distinguishes in the first circles those who are there by sufferance, and those who constitute them first circles, and attach themselves to the fountain of honors, not the conduits. The true aspirant goes one step further, and discerns in himself the fountain of these fountainlets, and so becomes the giver of all fine and high influences. In him is the source of all the romance, the luster, the dignity that fascinates him in some saloons with an inexpressible charm. For truth, honor, learning, perseverance are the Jove and Apollo who bewitched him. May 30th. Languages as discipline, much reading as an additional atmosphere or two, to gird the loins and make the muscles more tense. It seems time lost for a grown man to be turning the leaves of a dictionary like a boy to learn German, but I believe he will gain tension and creative power by so doing. Good books have always a prolific atmosphere about them and brood upon the spirit. The following is a note from the editor. Newton was still the temporary abiding place. On May 31st, Emerson wrote to his brother Edward in Puerto Rico, "Here sit mother and I among the pine trees, still almost as we shall lie by and by under them." And telling Edward of the accession of property that had come to him from his late wife's estate, urged him to come home and join him, saying, "If you will come, we will retreat into Berkshire and make a little world of other stuff." June 2nd. The life of women is unfortunately so much for exhibition that the minutest trait pleases which is wholly natural, even to a girl's crying, because it thundered, "Et ce que descent les femmes l'une de l'autre." That is my rough approximation of a French phrase that is untranslated here. And with that, I will continue to the next part. What more sensible than that what they say of Mr. Blank? that he sells his splendid Chinese house and goes to live at Watertown because he cannot make a bow and pleasantly entertain the crowd of company that visit him. CCE says he should build a large room. Preached at Waltham yesterday. Expect every day when some trenchant Iarno will come across me and read me such a lesson. Is the preacher one to make a fool of himself for the entertainment of other people? Would he say, when there is any difference of level felt in the footboard of the pulpit and the floor of the parlor, you have not said that which you should say? The best sermon would be a quiet conversational analysis of these felt difficulties, discords, to show the chain under the leather, to show the true within the supposed advantage of Christian institutions. There are several worthy people making themselves less because they would act the police officer and keep the factory people at church. I say, be genuine, they answer. If we should, our society, which has no real virtue, would go to pot. And so the yoke, it is confessed, is only born out of fear. Suppose that they should let the societies go down and form new and genuine ones. Let such as felt the advantage of a sermon in social worship meet voluntarily and compel nobody. June 3rd. The lower tone you take, the more flexible your voice is. June 5th. What perpetual working and counterworking in us, so that many good actions spring from bad motives, and many bad actions from good motives. Verily, then how slovenly and despite ourselves we are continually jostled into knowledge of truth. D.P. commends peace to the boys debate the matter and give such cogent reasons to the contrary that D.P. in anger and fear to be put down wades out beyond his depth in the other direction and gets unawares a knowledge of the infinite reason of love. Highest praise and happiness is it to go forward one step of our own, seeing and finding ourselves in a position whose advantages we foresaw. Fatal tendency to hang on to the letter and let the spirit go. We will debate the precept about turning the cheek to the smiter, the coat and cloak, the not taking thought what ye shall speak, etc., and question whether it is now practicable and is now obligatory. Yet every one of us has had his hours of illumination by the same Spirit when he fully understood those commands and saw that he did not need them. He had the commander giving fresh precepts fit for the monument and the act. Yet it is well that Christ's are recorded. They show how high the waters flowed when the Spirit brooded upon them, and are a measure of our deficiency. The wonder that is felt at these precepts is a measure of our unreason. Emerson writes briefly on antagonisms. There are persons both of superior character and intellect whose superiority quite disappears when they are put together. They neutralize, anticipate, puzzle, and belittle each other. June 8th. The solitary bird that sung in the pine tree reminded me of one talker who has nothing to say alone, but when friends come and the conversation grows loud, is forthwith set to intense activity, mechanically echoing and strengthening everything that is said without any regard to the subject or to truth. The soul has its diurnal, annual, and secular periodic motions like the needle. You may doubt for a day, but you will believe before the week's end. You may abandon your friendships and your designs, as you think, on good advice for these months. But by and by it will come back as with thunder from all heaven, that God crowns him who persists in his purposes, no fair weather friend, that the very armory of heroes and sages is in obscurity, conflict, high heart which sustained itself alone. You are there in that place to testify. There was a man in Sais who was very good to all people, but he could not be trusted alone. When he was left alone, all the devils associated themselves to him, and he robbed, murdered, committed adultery, blasphemed, lied, cringed. June 10th. One has dim foresight of hitherto uncomputated mechanical advantages who rides on the railroad, and moreover a practical confirmation of the ideal philosopher that matter is phenomenal, whilst men and trees and barns whiz by you as fast as the leaves of a dictionary. As our tea kettle hissed along through a field of mayflowers, we could judge of the sensations of a swallow who skims by trees and bushes with about the same speed. The very permanence of matter seems compromised, and oaks, fields, hills, hitherto esteemed symbols of stability, do absolutely dance by you. The countrymen called it hell in harness. What habits of observation has my friend, what keen senses! It would seem as if nothing, though under your nose, was permitted to be visible to you until he had seen it. Thereafter all the world may see it, and it never leaves your eyes. Washington wanted a fit public. Aristides, Phocion, Regulus, Hampden had worthy observers, but there is yet a dearth of American genius. I went to the menagerie Tuesday and saw 14 pelicans, a sacred ibis, a gazelle, zebras, a capybara, ichneumon, hyena, etc. It seems to me like visiting the spirits in prison, yet not to preach. There was the mystery, no word could pass from me to them. Animals have been called by some German the dreams of nature. I think we go to our own dreams for a conception of their consciousness. In a dream I have the same instinctive obedience, the same torpidity of the highest power, the same unsurprised assent to the monstrous, as these metamorphosed men exhibit. The pelicans remind one of Nick Bottom. One has a kind of compassionate fear lest they should have a glimpse of their forlorn condition. What a horrible calamity would be to them one moment's endowment of reason! Yet sometimes the Negro excites the same feeling, and sometimes the sharp-witted prosperous white man. You think if you could overlook his own condition, he could not be kept from suicide. But to the contemplations of the reason is there never penitence. The scholar seeks the ingenious boy to apprise him of the treasures within his reach, to show him poetry, religion, philosophy, and congratulate him on being born into the universe. The boy's parents immediately call to thank him for his interest in their son, and ask him to procure him a schoolmaster's situation. June 18th. Everything teaches, even dilettantism. The dilettante does not, to be sure, learn anything of botany by playing with his microscope, and with the terminology of plants, but he learns what dilettantism is. He distinguishes between what he knows and what he affects to know, and through some pain and self-accusation, he is attaining to things themselves. Webster's speeches seem to be the utmost that the unpoetic West has accomplished or can. We all lean on England, scarce a verse, a page, a newspaper, but is writ in imitation of English forms. Our very manners and conversation are traditional, and sometimes the life seems dying out of all literature, and this enormous paper currency of words is accepted instead. I suppose the evil may be cured by this rank rabble party, the Jacksonism of the country, heedless of English and of all literature, a stone cut out of the ground without hands. They may root out the hollow dilettantism of our cultivation in the coarsest way, and the newborn may begin again to frame their own world with greater advantage. Meantime, Webster is no imitator, but a true genius for his work, if that is not the highest. But every true man stands on top of the world. He has a majestic understanding which is in its right place the servant of the reason, and employed ever to bridge over the gulf between the revelations of his reason, his vision, and the facts within in the microscope optics of the calculators that surround him. Long may he live. It is singular that every natural object, how wearisome soever in daily observation, is always agreeable in description, and doubly so in illustration. June 20th. What a charm does Wilhelm Meister spread over society, which we were just getting to think odious. And yet, as I read the book today, and thought of Goethe as the Tag und Fahrers Hefte describes him, he seemed to me, all-sighted, gifted, indefatigable student as he is, to be only another poor monad after the fashion of his little race, bestirring himself immensely to hide his nothingness, spinning his surface directly before the eyes to conceal the universe of his ignorance. The finest poems of the world have been expedients to get bread, or else expedients to keep the writer from the madhouse and amuse him and his fellow men with the illusion that he knew. But the greatest passages they have writ, the infinite conclusions to which they owe their fame, are only confessions. Throughout, Goethe prevails the undersong of confession and amazement, the apothegm of Socrates, the recantation of man. The first questions are always to be asked, and we fend them off by much speaking and many books, so that scarcely can I blame the man who affects to philosophize as some sensualists do, and say his fun is profound calculation. And yet it is the best in the poorest view to keep the powers healthy and supple by appropriate action. All things, complained the philosopher, hasten back to unity. The bells in America toll because Lafayette has died in France. The bells in all the earth, in church, monastery, castle, and pagoda, might well toll for the departure of so pure, faithful, heroic, secular a spirit out of the earth to which it has been salt and spikenard. Go in, great heart, to the invisible, to the kingdom of love and faith. He has, quote, lingered among the last of those bright clouds which on the steady breeze of honor sail in long procession calm and beautiful. It occurred that the gestures of the reason are graceful and majestic, those of the understanding quick and mean. The uplifted eye of memory, the solemn pace, perfect repose, and simple attitudes of meditation inspire respect, but the moment the senses call us back, and the understanding directs us, we run, start, look askance, or turn and look behind us. We skulk, fumble, exceed in manner and voice, and suffer. Live by reason, and you will not make the foul mouths, nor utter the foul breath, nor drag disgracefully sleepy days that convince Alexander that he is mortal. When Minerva, they say, saw her distorted face in a brook, she threw away her hautboy. June 26th. If friendship were perfect, there would be no false prayers. But what could Wilhelm have done at the Crab's house? The rare women that charm us are those happily constituted persons who take possession of society wherever they go, and give it its form, its tone. If they sit as we sit, to wait for what shall be said, we shall have no Olympus. To their genius, elegance is essential. It is enough that we men stammer and mince words and play the clown and pedant alternately. They must speak as clearly and simply as a song. I say all this is a happiness, not a merit, and few there be that find it. Society cannot give it, nor the want of society withhold it. Aunt Mary and S.A.R. never wait for the condescending influences of society, but seek it out, scrutinize it, amuse themselves with a little, sympathize with and venerate the great. And Ellen, in a life of solitude, was incapable of an inelegance. Yesterday the attentions of the poor girl with flowers made me think how elegant is kindness. Kindness is never vulgar, genius and strong. Will may be only phenomena in the chain of causes, and most men and women may grow up to be what they are, as the cows and horses grow in the pastures, but kindness from a perfect stranger, a sudden will to benefit me and everybody, is a salient spring. It is a hint of the presence of the living God. The condition of young women, even the most favored, excites sometimes a profound pity. But kindness, native courtesy, redeems them at once out of your pity. They are happy, and the objects of your joy and your respect. Quote, happy, happier far than thou, with the laurel on thy brow, she who makes the humblest hearth, lovely but to one on earth. Next door to us lives a young man who is learning to drum. He studies hard at his science every night. I should like to reward his music with a wreath of Smilex pedicularis, which is said in the footnote to probably be an older name for the common catbrier. Goethe and Carlyle, and perhaps Novalis, have an undisguised dislike or contempt for common virtue standing on common principles. Meantime, they are dear lovers, steadfast maintainers of the pure ideal morality. But they worship it as the highest beauty. their love is artistic. Praise Socrates to them, or Fenelon, much more in any inferior contemporary good man, and they freeze at once into silence. It is to them sheer prose. The Tag und Ferris Hefte is a book unparalleled in America, an account of all events, persons, studies taken from one point of view. The problem to be solved is, how shall this soul called Goethe be educated? And whatever he does or whatever befalls him is viewed solely in relation to its effect upon the development of his mind. Even in the arms of his mistress at Rome, he says he studied sculpture and poetry. To husband our admiration is an intellectual temperance indispensable to health. But Goethe was a person who hated words that did not stand for things, and had a sympathy with everything that existed, and therefore never writes without saying something. He will be artist and look at God and man and the future and the infinite as a self-possessed spectator who believed that what he saw he could delineate. Herder wisely questioned whether a man had a right thus to affect the God instead of working with all his heart in his place. Self-cultivation is yet the moral of all that Goethe has writ, and in indolence, intolerance, and perversion I think we can spare an olive and a laurel for him. No man has drawn his materials of fiction from so wide a circuit. Very properly he introduces into the machinery of his romance whatever feeling or impulse the most rapt enthusiast has trusted in. Coincidences, dreams, omens, spiritual impressions, and a habitual religious faith, all these are the materials which, as a wise artist, he avails himself of. Nevertheless, there is a difference between thought and thought, and it is as real a defect in a man not to perceive the right of his moral sentiments to his allegiance as it is not to be conscious of moral sentiments. Yet Goethe, with all his fine things about Enstaggen, can write and print too like Rochester and Berenger. As to Carlyle, he is an exemplification of Novalus's maxim concerning the union of poetry and philosophy. He has married them, and both are the gainers. Who has done so before as truly and as well? Sartor Resartus is a philosophical poem. Then the editor says, added here November 30th. Goethe is praised as, and then there's a Greek word, untranslated, or all-sided. And if I understand it, this is the apology that is made for his Epicurean life compared with his religious perceptions. To praise a man for such quality is like praising an observatory for being very low and massive and a very good fort. It is not more than the office of man to receive all impressions, that it is to distinguish sharply between them. He that has once pronounced intelligently the word self-renouncement, invisible leader, powers of sorrow, and the like, is forever bound to the service of the superhuman. We are wonderfully protected. We have scarce a misfortune, a hindrance, an infirmity, an enemy, but it is somehow productive of singular advantage to us. After groaning through years of poverty and hard labor, the mind perceives that really it has come the shortest road to a valuable position. That, though the rough climate was not good for leaves and flowers, it was good for timber. It has been saved from what associations? It has been introduced to what thoughts and feelings? Quote, He knows you not, ye mighty powers, who knows not sorrow. God brings us by ways we know not and like not into paradise. July 12th. Quote, Lincoln Bell flings o'er the fen his far-renowned alarum. I read this in straight regret that I did not visit Lincoln Cathedral and hear the far-renowned alarum. Such superstitious preference do we give to other men's senses. Undoubtedly something in my own sphere, or spheral, takes the place to me of that particular gratification. I have some Lincoln Bell, heard with joy in my ordinary movements. Yet I long to hear this other simply out of deference to my fellows in England who have exalted it by their love. Better believe in the perfection of thine own lot. Retreat upon your own spontaneous emotions. Mark the occasions of them, and cheerfully believe that what has excited true and deep pleasure in one man is fitted to excite the same emotions in all men. So will I find my Lincolnshire in the next pasture, and the bell in the first thrush that sings. Napoleon sat back on his horse in the midst of the march to catch the fine tone of a bell. With myself I shall always dwell, but Lincoln and Niagara and Cairo are less accessible. And yet, can aught approach the effect of the Sabbath morn in quietest retreats? And yet is its sacredness derivative and alien. Some thoughts are superficial, others have their root in your being. Always discriminate, when you would write, between them, and never choose the first for a topic. Diogenes moved his tub in winter into the sun, and in summer into the shade, and compared himself to the Persian king who spent the one season at Susa and the other at Ecbatana. As many languages as a man knows, said Charles V, so many times is he a man. Our eagerness to possess this gift of foreign speech rather hinders than helps us to it. I stand in a company where circulates how much wit and information, yet not one thought can pass from them to me. I do not understand their speech. My countryman enters who understands it, and the communication between them and him is perfect. Stung with desire, I devote myself to the task of learning the language, but this perpetual poetic vision before me, which is quite foreign from their experience, and which I shall lose as soon as I master the speech, affords me so much the entertainment as to embarrass every particular effort at dialogue, and dispirits me and unfits me for that simple effort to know the things said to me, and to convey my thought in return, which is the best instructor. Ralph Emerson said to me in Paris that the Americans think there is some magic in speaking and writing French. He who has mastered the tongue sees nothing behind him but simple addition of particulars, and this new knowledge blends harmoniously with all his experience, and, moreover, it has lost all its anticipated value. When the wrong handle is grasped of comparative anatomy, the tresses of beauty remind us of a mane. How much is an assembly of men restrained? It seems often like a collection of angels and a collection of demons in disguise. Then there's a quote in Italian by Michelangelo, which is untranslated. Bangor, July 15th. The thoughtful man laments, perhaps, the unpliancy of his organization, which draws down the corners of his mouth to ludicrous longitude, whilst all the company chat and titter around him. What matters it? He actually sympathizes with each of the company more truly than the liveliest chatterbox, for they are all going back from this smiling time to discipline, to silence, to labor, and anxiety, and then they recall the melancholy man with a fraternal remembrance. In our plans of life in apparent confusion, we seem not to know what we want. Why, it is plain we can do best something which in the present form of society will be misconstrued and taken for another thing. I wish to be a true and free man, and therefore would not be a woman, or a king, or a clergyman, each of which classes in the present order of things is a slave. Mr. Canning judged right in preferring the title Mr. in the company of Alexander and Napoleon to my lord. The simple, untitled, unofficed citizen possessing manners, power, cultivation, is more formidable and more pleasing than any dignitary whose condition and etiquette only makes him more vulnerable and more helpless. Noble strain of the Revolutionary Papers. See Williamson, History of Maine, Vol.2, pages 408 to 411. And when the port of Boston had been closed in June of 1774, 16 days they tolled the bells in the town of Falmouth all day, and addressed an affectionate letter to the inhabitants of Boston. We look upon you, they say, as sufferers for the common cause of American liberty. We highly appreciate your courage and endure privation and distress, sensibly aware that the season puts to severest trial the virtues of magnanimity, patience, and fortitude, which your example will honorably exemplify. We beg leave to tender you all the encouragements which the considerations of friendship and respect can inspire, and all the assurances of succor which full hearts and feeble abilities can render. July 18th. The abomination of desolation is not a burned town or a country wasted by war, but the discovery that the man who has moved you is an enthusiast upon calculation. Indeed, all that class of the severe and restrictive virtues are at a market almost too high for humanity. May be so, that gives them their worth. It is that we ourselves, the observers, have been imposed upon, and led to condemn the actor before, and the far-sighted heroism of the sufferer has felt the condemnation, and yet persisted in his own judgment and kept up his courage. It is that conviction that adds eagerness to our commendation now. What is there of the divine in a load of bricks? What is there of the divine in a barber's shop? Much, all. George A. Sampson died Wednesday evening, 23rd July, 1834. This is the end of Part 2 of Journal Collection number 25 by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it is also the 8th part of Volume 3 that we are reading. And in the following video, we will continue the rest of Journal Collection 25 with Part 3. Thank you for listening.